Good evening. We all know him as George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. But did you know his real life was even more heroic than his movies? Tonight, we're going to tell you a story that Hollywood could never have written. A story so powerful, so genuine, that it'll restore your faith in what it truly means to be an American hero. So let me ask you this, and I want you to comment below. What's your favorite Jimmy Stewart movie? Was it Mr. Smith Goes to Washington? Maybe The Philadelphia Story? Or perhaps Rear Window? Drop your answer in the comments, because tonight we're celebrating a man who gave us so much more than great films. He gave us an example of what true character looks like. Picture this. It's February 1941. The Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles is absolutely glittering with stars. Flashbulbs are popping like fireworks on the 4th of July. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. Orchestra music drifts through the grand ballroom. Clark Gable is there, Cary Grant, Joan Crawford. All of Hollywood's royalty gathered for the biggest night in show business, the Academy Awards. And there he is, James Maitland Stewart, 32 years old, tall and lanky with that aw-shucks smile and that distinctive drawl that made him America's sweetheart. He's sitting at a table, nervously fidgeting with his bow tie the way he always did when he was anxious. His film, The Philadelphia Story, had been a smashing success. He'd been nominated for Best Actor, but Jimmy, being Jimmy, didn't think he had a chance. He was sure his friend Henry Fonda would win for The Grapes of Wrath. Then they called his name. James Stewart, Best Actor. The room erupted in applause. Jimmy stood up, that familiar look of genuine surprise and humility washing over his face. He made his way to the stage, probably thinking about how his father back in Indiana, Pennsylvania would react. His dad, who ran a hardware store. His dad, who believed in hard work and honesty and serving something bigger than yourself. Jimmy took that golden statue in his hands, and in typical fashion, he gave one of the shortest acceptance speeches in Oscar history. No grand pronouncements, no theatrical declarations, just a simple, heartfelt thank you. He was on top of the world, the biggest star in Hollywood, box office gold. Studios were offering him contracts that would make him wealthy beyond imagination. Roles were pouring in. The future was brighter than the California sun. He had everything a man could want: fame, fortune, the adoration of millions. And then, just months later, he walked away from all of it. You see, while Jimmy Stewart was making movies, the world was falling apart. Europe was burning. Hitler's armies were goose-stepping across the continent. The Battle of Britain was raging in the skies. American boys, farm boys and city boys, clerks and factory workers were looking at the news and wondering if they'd soon be called to fight. And Jimmy Stewart, with his exemption-worthy status as a major Hollywood celebrity, with his ability to stay safe and comfortable in Los Angeles, couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. Now, let me be clear about something. Jimmy Stewart didn't have to serve. He could have done what many celebrities did. He could have sold war bonds, done publicity tours, made patriotic films. The government would have loved that. Jimmy Stewart supports our troops. Great for morale, great for his image. Safe, comfortable, respectable. But that wasn't who Jimmy Stewart was. In March 1941, 9 months before Pearl Harbor, before America was even officially in the war, Jimmy Stewart did something that shocked Hollywood to its core. He walked into an Army Air Corps recruiting station and tried to enlist. Not for publicity, not for a photo opportunity. He genuinely wanted to serve. There was just one problem. He was underweight. Can you imagine? The Army rejected Jimmy Stewart. They said he was 5 pounds under the minimum requirement for his height. Now, most men would have taken that as a sign, would have said, well, I tried, and gone back to their comfortable life. Not Jimmy. He went home and ate everything he could get his hands on. Milkshakes, steaks, potatoes. He was determined. He came back a few weeks later, made the weight requirement by the slimmest of margins, and enlisted as a private. A private. The biggest movie star in America, an Oscar winner, started at the absolute bottom. He could have asked for a commission, he could have pulled strings. Heaven knows he had the connections. But Jimmy Stewart wanted to earn his way, just like every other American boy putting on a uniform. The studio executives were beside themselves. Do you know how much money they stood to lose? Jimmy was supposed to start production on 3 major films. Contracts were signed, money was invested, and here he was, throwing it all away to become a buck private making $21 a month. They begged him to reconsider. They offered him more money, better roles, anything to keep their biggest star. Jimmy's response was simple. His country needed him. That was all there was to it. So there he was, at 33 years old, older than most of the recruits, going through basic training, waking up at dawn, running obstacle courses, learning to march and salute and follow orders from men half his age. And he never complained, never asked for special treatment. The other soldiers didn't quite know what to make of him at first. Here was George Bailey doing push-ups in the mud right next to them. But Jimmy won them over the same way he won over audiences, with genuine humility and kindness and that infectious laugh. Now, Jimmy had been fascinated by flying since he was young. His father had been skeptical of aviation, called it a dangerous fad, but Jimmy was mesmerized by it. So when he joined the Army Air Corps, he was determined to become a pilot. And not just any pilot. He wanted to fly combat missions. The military had other ideas. They looked at this tall, handsome, famous actor and saw gold, propaganda gold. They wanted to put him in training films, recruitment posters, have him tour bases and shake hands and smile for cameras, keep him safe stateside, where his fame could be useful and his potential death wouldn't be a public relations disaster. Jimmy Stewart refused. Politely, but firmly, he refused. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to play soldier while real soldiers were dying. He wanted to be useful, truly useful. So he fought through the bureaucracy and the well-meaning officers who wanted to keep him safe, and he got himself assigned to bomber training. He was going to fly B-24 Liberators, heavy bombers, the kind that flew deep into enemy territory, the kind that faced German fighters in anti-aircraft fire, the kind that didn't always come home. By 1944, Captain James Stewart was stationed in England with the 445th Bombardment Group. Think about that for a moment. The man who made us cry in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the man who made us believe in the goodness of small-town America, was now sitting in the cockpit of a 4-engine bomber, preparing to fly missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Picture him there. It's 4 in the morning at an airbase in eastern England. The English countryside is still dark, wrapped in that thick, damp fog that seems to seep into your bones. Jimmy is in the briefing room with his crew and dozens of other airmen. They're looking at maps, learning about today's target. Maybe it's a factory in Germany, maybe a rail yard in France, maybe a submarine pen. The intelligence officer is explaining the route, the expected resistance, the likelihood of encountering German fighters. Everyone in that room knows the statistics. Bomber crews face some of the highest casualty rates of the war. The odds of completing a full tour of duty, 25 missions, weren't good. You watched friends take off in the morning and never come back. You saw planes explode in midair. You saw them spiral down in flames. You saw empty bunks and personal effects being packed up to send home to grieving mothers. And Jimmy Stewart, who could have been safe in Hollywood, who could have been making movies and making money, was right there with them. Scared? Yes. Any sane man would be scared. But ready.
determined, leading by example. He wasn't just a pilot. He became a squadron commander, then an operations officer. He was responsible for planning missions, for sending men into danger, for making life and death decisions. The weight of command sat heavy on those lanky shoulders. When planes didn't come back, when men under his command died, he felt every loss personally. The missions were brutal. Imagine being crammed into a B-24 Liberator at 25,000 feet where the temperature is 40 degrees below zero. You're wearing layers of clothing and a heated suit that doesn't quite work. Your oxygen mask is freezing to your face. You can see your breath crystallizing in the air. The plane is loud, so loud you can barely think. The engines roar, the wind screams, metal groans and creaks.
And then the flak starts. German anti-aircraft fire. Black clouds of shrapnel exploding all around you. Each burst capable of tearing through aluminum skin and human flesh like tissue paper. The plane shakes and rattles. You hear metal pinging as fragments hit the fuselage. Someone on the intercom is calling out, "Enemy fighters, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs," diving down with cannons blazing. Your gunners are firing back, hot brass cartridges rolling around at your feet, the smell of cordite and oil and fear. You keep the plane steady. You have to. Your bombardier needs a stable platform to drop the payload. So you fly straight and level while all hell breaks loose around you. While planes to your left and right are getting hit, going down. While men you ate breakfast with this morning are dying. You fly the mission. You do your job. Jimmy Stewart flew 20 combat missions over enemy territory. 20 times he climbed into that bomber knowing he might not come back. 20 times he led men into the most dangerous skies in the world. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the French Croix de Guerre. He rose to the rank of colonel before the war ended. But here's what really tells you about the character of Jimmy Stewart. Here's what separates the real heroes from those who just play them in movies. When the war ended and he came home, he refused to talk about it. Can you imagine? Most men, especially celebrities, would have dined out on those stories for the rest of their lives. The interviews, the book deals, the speaking tours. Let me tell you about the time I flew over Berlin. Hollywood would have begged him to make a film about his experiences, to capitalize on his genuine heroism. Jimmy Stewart wanted nothing to do with it. He came back to Los Angeles a different man, thinner, older. The boyish innocence that had defined his pre-war roles was gone, replaced by something deeper, something haunted. He'd seen things, done things, lost friends, carried burdens that no amount of acting could prepare you for. He suffered from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, though they didn't call it that back then. He had nightmares, flashbacks, the 1,000-yard stare that combat veterans know too well. But he didn't complain, didn't seek sympathy. He just quietly tried to rebuild his life and his career. He wanted to be Jimmy Stewart, the actor again, not Jimmy Stewart, the war hero. He felt uncomfortable with praise for his service. In his mind, he'd only done what millions of other Americans had done. He didn't want special recognition for simply doing his duty. Think about that. In an age where people seek fame for the smallest accomplishments, where everyone wants to be celebrated and recognized and thanked, here was a man with genuine, extraordinary heroism who wanted nothing more than to be treated like everyone else. His first role after the war was in It's a Wonderful Life. And if you watch that film knowing what Jimmy had been through, it hits different, doesn't it? When George Bailey breaks down and cries, when he's overwhelmed and desperate, you can see real pain there, real depth. Frank Capra, the director, knew what Jimmy had experienced. He knew that the lightness and innocence of his pre-war performances had been replaced by something more profound,
a man who had looked into the abyss and come back, a man who understood sacrifice and loss and the weight of responsibility. The film wasn't initially successful. It wasn't until years later that it became the Christmas classic we all know and love. But Jimmy Stewart's performance in it, that emotional rawness, that genuine vulnerability, came from a place of real suffering and real courage. He continued to serve in the Air Force Reserve after the war. He eventually became a brigadier general, the highest-ranking entertainer in military history. But he wore that rank quietly, with the same humility he brought to everything else. When younger officers wanted to hear his war stories, he'd deflect. Talk about the men who didn't come home instead. Talk about the real heroes, as he called them. In interviews throughout his life, when reporters would try to get him to talk about his combat experiences, he'd give short, uncomfortable answers and change the subject. He'd talk about his movies, his family, his love of poetry, anything but the war. It wasn't modesty for show. It was genuine discomfort with being praised for something he felt any decent American would have done. There's a story that encapsulates Jimmy Stewart perfectly. Years after the war, he was at a veterans event. A young reporter, too young to remember World War II, asked him if he considered himself a hero. Jimmy looked at him with those sad, kind eyes and said something along the lines of, "The heroes are the ones who didn't come back. I just did my job and was lucky enough to make it home." That was who he was. A man who flew 20 combat missions, who commanded bomber squadrons, who earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, calling himself lucky, refusing to take credit, deflecting praise to the fallen. He wasn't just acting like a good man, he was a good man. You see, Hollywood is full of people who play heroes, who wear costumes and deliver stirring speeches and look brave for the cameras. And that's fine. That's entertainment. We need stories. We need inspiration. But every so often, very rarely, you get someone who lives the values they portray on screen. Someone whose real life is more admirable than any script. Jimmy Stewart was that rare individual. He could have avoided service entirely. He could have taken the safe publicity roles. He could have come home and built a career on his war record. At every turn, he chose the harder path, the path of genuine service, the path of humility, the path of integrity. And it wasn't just the war. Throughout his life, Jimmy Stewart exemplified old-fashioned American values. He was married to Gloria for 45 years until her death. One woman, one marriage in Hollywood. Think about how rare that is. He raised his children and her 2 sons from a previous marriage with love and dedication. He remained friends with people from his hometown in Pennsylvania his entire life. He never forgot where he came from. He was known in Hollywood as one of the kindest, most professional actors to work with. No tantrums, no diva behavior. He showed up on time, knew his lines, treated everyone from the director to the craft services person with equal respect. Old-fashioned professionalism, old-fashioned decency. In 1997, Jimmy Stewart passed away at the age of 89. The tributes poured in from around the world. Presidents praised him, fellow actors remembered him, veterans saluted him. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from ordinary Americans who lined up to pay their respects. Regular folks who felt like they'd lost a friend. Because that's what Jimmy Stewart represented to so many people. A friend, a neighbor, a decent man who did the right thing even when it was hard. They say they don't make men like Jimmy Stewart anymore. Do you agree? I want you to think about that. Comment below with your thoughts. Do we still have that kind of character in America? That quiet strength? That willingness to sacrifice without seeking recognition? That humility in the face of genuine accomplishment? I believe we do. I believe that spirit still exists in our country, in our veterans who serve without fanfare, in our teachers and firefighters and nurses who do essential work without seeking glory, in our neighbors who help each other without expecting anything in return. Jimmy Stewart wasn't a superhero. He was a regular American who chose to live by a code of honor and decency, and that choice is available to us all. His legacy isn't just the wonderful films he left behind, though we treasure those. His legacy is the example he set, that fame and success don't have to corrupt, that you can be celebrated and still remain humble, that doing your duty isn't something to brag about, it's simply what decent people do, that true heroism is often quiet and uncomfortable with attention. When we watch It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas, when we see George Bailey realize that his small, humble life touched so many others, that his decency and sacrifice mattered more than he knew, we're watching Jimmy Stewart's philosophy played out on screen. Every man's life touches so many others. When he's not around, he leaves an awful hole. Jimmy Stewart left a hole when he passed, but he also left us something invaluable, a reminder of what we can be, what we should strive to be. So tonight, as we close this special report, I want you to remember Jimmy Stewart, not just as an actor, though he was one of the greatest, not just as a veteran, though he served with extraordinary courage. Remember him as an example, as proof that character matters, that integrity matters, that you can achieve great things and remain humble, that you can face terrible danger and not make it about yourself, that you can live in the spotlight and keep your soul intact. We need reminders like that, especially now, especially in a world that often celebrates the wrong things, where people are famous for being famous, where humility is seen as weakness and self-promotion is considered necessary. Jimmy Stewart reminds us that there's another way, a better way, the way of quiet
strength and genuine service and authentic humility. He once said that he never thought of himself as a celebrity or a movie star. He was just a guy who got very lucky and tried to do his best. Can you imagine? One of the most beloved actors in American history, a decorated war hero, a brigadier general, considering himself just a lucky guy doing his best. That's not false modesty. That's who he genuinely was. And maybe that's the final lesson Jimmy Stewart teaches us, that greatness doesn't require arrogance, that heroism doesn't require boasting, that you can be extraordinary while remaining fundamentally decent and humble and kind, that the measure of a man isn't in his awards or his fame, but in how he treats others when no one is watching, in the choices he makes when the easy path is right there for the taking. Jimmy Stewart had every opportunity to take the easy path, over and over again. And over again, he chose something better, something harder, something more honorable. He chose duty over comfort, service over safety, humility over glory, integrity over expedience. And in doing so, he became not just a great actor, but a great American. The kind of American we should all aspire to be. So yes, we all know him as George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. But now you know the rest of the story. Now you know that his real life was indeed more heroic than his movies. That the values he portrayed on screen, honesty, decency, courage, selflessness, were values he actually lived by. That Mr. Smith really did go to Washington and then to war, and then came home and just tried to be a good citizen again. They don't make them like Jimmy Stewart anymore, some say. But I believe they can. I believe we can, if we remember his example, if we choose character over convenience, if we serve something bigger than ourselves, if we remain humble in success and graceful in hardship, if we do our duty without seeking applause, if we treat everyone with respect and kindness regardless of their station, if we remember that true heroism is often quiet and that integrity matters more than recognition. Jimmy Stewart showed us the way. The question is, will we follow? Will we teach our children and grandchildren about men like him? Will we hold up his example in a world that desperately needs it? Will we remember that before there were superheroes in capes, there were real heroes in bomber jackets who did extraordinary things
and then came home and just tried to be a good citizen again? I think we will. I think that's why we're here tonight, sharing this story. Why you're watching this and commenting and hopefully sharing it with others. Because deep down, we recognize something essential in Jimmy Stewart's story. We recognize the America we love, the America we believe in, the America of quiet heroes and humble servants and decent people doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. That America still exists. It lives in the hearts of people who remember, who honor, who strive to be better, who understand that character is built in small choices made consistently over a lifetime. Jimmy Stewart built that character one choice at a time. From the hardware store in Pennsylvania to the heights of Hollywood to the bomber bases in England and back home again. Always choosing integrity, always choosing service, always choosing humility. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating, a life worth remembering, a man worth honoring. Not with monuments or parades, though he certainly earned those, but with something Jimmy Stewart would appreciate more, by living our own lives with a little more integrity, a little more humility, a little more service, a little more courage, by being the kind of people who do the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's how we honor Jimmy Stewart. That's how we keep his legacy alive. Not by talking about how great he was, though he was, but by striving to embody the values he represented. Duty, honor, country, humility, service, integrity. Those aren't just words. They're a way of life. A way of life Jimmy Stewart chose and showed us is possible. So from all of us here at Starlight News Network, thank you for joining us for this special tribute. Thank you for taking the time to remember a genuine American hero. Thank you for commenting and sharing and keeping these stories alive, because they matter. These stories of real heroes, of genuine character, of authentic service, they matter, now more than ever. God bless Jimmy Stewart. God bless all those who serve. And God bless America. This has been a special presentation of Starlight News Network, where we remember the heroes who made America great, not through words, but through deeds, not through self-promotion, but through selfless service, not through seeking glory, but through quiet integrity. Until next time, when we'll explore another legendary American story, perhaps the Duke himself, John Wayne, or maybe old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra, and his remarkable, complicated journey. Stories of real people, real heroes, real Americans. Until then, remember Jimmy Stewart, share his story, live his values, and keep the faith that made this country great. Good night, and God bless.